order to get everything ready for the Mass and all the other things we have to do. So, then with Father running along, I knew this was going to happen. Father Silva, Drew and I kind of played with my schedule over the last couple of weeks to try to juggle it around. So I'm going to cover what I think is very, very important. And, there's a couple of things that Father Silva asked me to cover with you, and I'm going to go ahead and cover that because he asked me to. But then I'm going to break from the norm and go somewhere else with this, okay? The reason I want to do that is because I want to leave you with some good angles of thought specific to your discernment, specific to the diaconate. I think that's very, very important. So with the hour, a little over an hour that I have, I'm supposed to break this at 2:30. And plus the fact that it is your last class, I want to make sure you get out here on time. They've got some housekeeping stuff to cover with you, so I'll go with that. Now, to save myself some time, rather than write anything on the board, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover about, well, at least 4 of these parts. The first one is the general norms for restoring the permanent diaconate. That's the part that Father Silva wanted me to cover with you. The second part is what is this gift, the character of holy order. And the third part is really getting more into the theology of holy orders. But more specifically, in parentheses I put, it's all about God, okay, as far as the holy orders is concerned. The fourth part will be the permanent diaconate, and subtitle on that I've got it as Be Who You Are. Very important. So let's see how much I can cover. If you have any questions along the way, certainly stop and ask me, okay? I won't have any problem with that. We'll just cover what we can as best as we can. Now again, Father Eleazar was kind enough to direct me to a specific article. It's called Sacrum Diaconatus Ordinum, which means general norms for restoring the permanent diaconate in the Latin Church. So June 18th, 1967 is a very, very important date for us. And in a little bit, I'll be handing out the article that Father asked me to talk about. Due to time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through a couple of pieces on that. There's about 7 or 8 pages on it. But I did break it into a few parts here that I'm going to talk about, just to kind of get you up to speed about the diaconate. Now, some of this, if you guys have heard some of this already, don't stop me. I've got a ball of wax going here, and I want to make sure I cover as much as I possibly can. So, to start with, the story of the permanent diaconate is really rather interesting, and there's some aspects of it that I truly appreciate, especially myself being a deacon, and I hope to cover that as we move along the way. Unfortunately, it followed a stark demise after a period of time, having almost virtually disappeared from the Latin Church, but now it's back, and it's a great fortune to the Church, because I think what it's done, the diaconate, has given the Catholic Church a fresh set of hands by which we can do the work that we're going to be doing. Now, I myself might be a little bit biased in this, but the Second Vatican Council's restoration of the diaconate as a permanent order of ministerial ministry represents truly what I think is opening up, a greater opening up of the Church to all Catholics. Quite wonderful. Now, the historical beginning of a deacon's ministry is recorded, if you look at it, in Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. Just you probably read the story, but just to go through it, at that time there were many disciples available because the church was already beginning to grow. But it so happens that there was some friction beginning to develop between the Greek and the Hebrew followers. There were things that were being done, but also things that were not being done. And I think it kind of really speaks well to why the diaconate is so important. It talks about what we as deacons will cover for the church. One of the problems that is coming up was that widows themselves were being neglected. They were getting all the food that was necessary for them. They had nowhere to go for assistance, and so did many others in the daily distribution of food. So in hearing this, the 12 disciples, apostles rather, called together the community of disciples. And I'm just going to kind of tell you what my version was of how that conversation went about. They said, well, wasn't all this problem with widows, wasn't this covered during the last parish council meeting? Why wasn't this already taken care of? Sounds familiar, Jeremy? Why do we have to rehash this again? Well, as is actually noted in Acts, the 12 summoned the community of the disciples and asked them to select from within them 7 men of good reputation. Now, this is what I think is very, very important because it still applies to this year. So they're looking for 7 men of good reputation. Here today, we have 4 of you, actually 8 of you, sitting here who are going to be a part of this. So it applies to you as well. So in choosing these 7 deacons to be, these men had to be, there's some specifics of what kind of men we were going to have. They were going to try to select. So it's men of the Spirit, men of wisdom, who could be put in charge of taking care of these needs of the church that were not being taken care of. Basically anyone who was being overlooked. I think that was very important to the church. And so in a nutshell, that's why we're here. There was a need. The apostles themselves needed help. So I think that's really kind of a beautiful commentary about, especially with the priesthood. When you think about the priesthood today, we're here to help these priests because they need help. There's not enough hands available. But in this case, it was to serve even at tables, ensuring the allocation of food. To go back again to Acts chapter 6, verse 1 through 6, the disciples said, the apostles said, it's not right for us, meaning themselves, to neglect the word of God. And to serve at the table was what they were being asked to find people for. I found that the thing about serving at the table kind of interesting. So they were looking for men, brothers, selected from among 7, considered reputable men. And again, they were looking for men full of spirit and wisdom, men who they could appoint to the tasks, the immediate needs at hand, whereas we, meaning the apostles, could then devote themselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. Now, it interests me that the 12 apostles did not deem it right. Did not deem it right to neglect the word of God by serving at tables. Now, I know exactly what they mean. It's all fine. They've got some really important work to do. So I had no problem with that. I understood what they meant. But by no way did this mean that future deacons would be relegated to working in parish kitchens, food pantries, and the like, although they do actually do some of that. But I want you to be aware that this provides for all of us as deacons a true hint about the type of work we are going to be involved in, and specifically the hierarchy of where we stand as deacons. Something that you're going to have to absorb and really take to heart. This does provide us a hint of where deacons stand, again, in the hierarchy. It's kind of like a nice little Polaroid shot of who we're going to be in all of this. You are going to be servants, so you need to be able to take a big bite of that pie and understand where you are. Now, beyond that, of great interest from its very, very inception, you might have noticed that it doesn't look like the evaluations for deacons has changed much. I found that rather unique. They're looking for wise men, reputable, of the Spirit, able to communicate. And I'm sorry I said men, but I think men and women should be included. However, the need for deacons, unfortunately, along the way, once the deacon and diaconate was established, started to die off. To be a priest was more in vogue. It's just the way things evolved. But consequently, the diaconate, as a distinct sacrament of holy orders, essentially became inactive for probably well over 1,000 years. The diaconate, basically, for all intents, became a transitional step on the way to the priesthood, nothing more than that. It's interesting, though, I didn't realize this, I guess I hadn't read much about it, was the Eastern Church did retain the diaconate. They did still continue to use deacons. But finally, June 18th, 1967, that's our date when the diaconate was finally established. I was reading some facts, and these are from 2014, but we have approximately 15,000 or so active deacons in the United States. That's a wonderful number. You guys, with all 5 of you, or perhaps 6, will represent 0.3% of that. But you know what? That's perfect. That's beautiful. That's extraordinary. Being the vocations office, I see where our numbers are, where they need to be. So I know Doesn't matter what the numbers are, let's just add, let's keep adding. So what I wanted to do now is take a really quick look at the first 7 deacons. And by the way, I'm truncating a lot of this because, I'm not going to have enough time. Now, do all of you know, do you remember, does anybody know the names of the first 7 deacons? Stephen, the martyr. Lawrence? I don't recognize him. Well, that's okay, it's cool. It's Stephen, the martyr. There was Philip, who was called the evangelist. Now, by the way, I went to the website to make sure I got the pronunciations on his names correct. The next one was Prochorus. Then there was Nicanor, Nicanor. And there was Timon. That's why I went to the website. I'm thinking, Timon. How do you pronounce that? Then there was Parmenas.
Timon.
Yeah. So I thought, it's like Simon or Timon. And so after Parmenas, there was Nicholas of Antioch. Now, these first 7 deacons that were chosen by this really infant church were again to be men of really very good report, because they were to be the public functionaries whose decisions were to settle commotions, infighting, and murmurings. And I'm not trying to describe Jeremy's job here.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John, yeah. They were to be men of substance in whom the public had confidence, okay? Listen to all these things that they're looking for. And as noted a moment ago, they must be men full of the Spirit. They must be pious. They must be wise. They must be prudent. They must be sound in judgment. So if any of you had lived back in that time, you'd have been viable candidates as one of these 7 deacons. I truly am convinced of that. Now, we know, of course, that in due time, it didn't go well for Stephen, who ended up being martyred after the elders and the scribes kind of incited the crowds to stone him to death. Our good fortune is that that's not a common practice anymore, but we know that Stephen became a wonderful preacher, very strong preacher, and take that to heart as well. It's going to be very important for you. Now, Philip himself, who is known as the evangelist, well, obviously it's because he himself became quite an effective preacher. He was known to help the sick, but drive off demons. And that's something obviously we're not going to engage in directly, hopefully as deacons. It's said, this is interesting, I threw it in just for grins, but the part about Philip is that it is said that he had 4 virgin daughters who had the gift of prophecy. The reason I threw that in is because I know as a deacon, you can never get enough good help around you. Now, Prochorus is said to have been a companion of Peter himself and later John. So I think he was in a wonderful position because he got almost a first-hand knowledge of who Jesus is. Can you imagine somebody who knows Jesus that intimately telling you all about Jesus himself? So can you imagine the effective things that he was able to tell people along the way as he preached as well? Not much is known about the other 4. Saint Nicanor, how did I pronounce that? Nicanor. He's honored on January 10th, as is Saint Timon on April 19th. Unfortunately, both died as martyrs. If you ever catch your ordo, you'll see the names kind of flying through it. I believe it was Timon is the guy who was tossed into a furnace at one point in time, and somehow he came out unharmed. And as I read that, I thought, well, that's a bad commentary on the effectiveness of furnaces back then. But later on, he himself was crucified. So don't lose heart, these crucifixions and being martyrs. Parmenas is remembered on January 22nd. Some think that he may have died of some kind of illness, but the fact is he was probably martyred as well. Now, the guy who's interesting in all this is Nicholas. Nicholas, I'm sure he was quite industrious and busy in his work, but I like the idea of Nicholas. And I'm probably more drawn to him because he was never honored as a saint in either the Eastern or the Western churches. He's one of the original 7 deacons, but what I like about him is he was the background guy. I love that. There's something very important to that. So let's all shoot to be Nicholas. Now, exact details of what the deacons did at those times. There's not that much detail about it. It isn't very known. very well known, but I will say this about that to this very day, they are still extraordinary examples to us of what the diaconate is, even to us in this day and age. It's extraordinary. But the point to keep in mind in this is that deacons, as those 7 were ordained as the sacramental sign of the church. I'll talk about that in a little bit. They were ordained as a sacramental sign of the church to the world of Christ, who came to serve and not to be served. That's key. Here's a little side note that in keeping with the first number of 7, the early church really never had more than 7 deacons in each community. It was decreed at one point in time that there would be no more than 7 in any city at all. But finally there was this council in Neo-Caesarea. Well, actually it was their council in 814 AD. They're the ones that decreed that 7 would be held. No numbers beyond that. It wasn't until the 11th century in Rome that they decided, oh, we got to double up on that number. So, but why 7 deacons? Anybody have an idea? You know, nobody really knows. Nobody really knows why it was the number of 7. 7 perhaps was just considered a sacred number, so they decided, oh, let's throw 7 in there. Some think at the time that there were 7 congregations that had already been established, so 7 would fall into there. Maybe it was just a practical number, who really knows. But what's important to observe in all of this is that beginning already in the early days of the church with those 7, the sacred order of a diaconate was already being held in great veneration. It was that important to the church at that point in time. Again, yes, it did go away for a while, but nonetheless, it did come back. Quite some time later, that's when the Vatican Council II, finally wisely decreed that the diaconate should be restored. It amazes me back in the 60s that they would have come up with that. I mean, what was going on prior to that? I had to study to figure out why suddenly was it going to be such an important thing. Of major importance, the Vatican Council saw it beneficial that those who perform a truly diaconal ministry be strengthened by something that was vastly important in all of this. Okay, from that get-go, they decreed there's something that needs to be done. Anybody know what that is?
Formation.
Pardon?
Formation.
No, although that was part of it. There's something of great benefit to reestablishing the diaconate in position of hands. That's huge. The imposition of hands over your head. That's where that thrust of this permanent diaconate in the holy orders is so blessedly important. You knew they had taken this awfully seriously. They were bringing it back, and they weren't going to take it ever away. This act actually goes back to the tradition of the apostles, the imposition of hands. It's incredible. It's incredible rather, because what it does and what it did then, it shows the special nature of this permanent diaconate into which you are wanting to get into. It's now just not that singular step to the priesthood. The permanent diaconate is adorned now with its own sacramental nature and its own special grace. That's what makes it so beautiful and dear to me. Just love that, and that's what I want you to think about and consider when you are ready to be ordained. It's that beautiful, and that's powerful, it's that extraordinary. Those who are called to the permanent diaconate then can permanently serve the mysteries of Christ permanently. Once you're ordained, that's it. You're in there forever, for life. And again, its own special grace, it's what makes it so beautiful. The sacramental nature, this indelible mark, spiritual mark, is imprinted on your souls. We all know that when you're baptized, you receive this indelible mark, now marked as a child of Christ, a child of God, and never goes away. Sin can't remove that baptism. We can't remove that sign. But with holy orders, the permanent diaconate, you receive this indelible character, and I'll talk about that in just a tiny bit. So the Vatican Council truly considered it not only proper, but also also necessary that all of these specific norms be set up in order for you here to become deacons. And that's where this, I'll hand it out just a little bit, where this Sacrum Diaconatus Ordinum is kind of interesting. There's several points towards the back, but I just wanted to cover a few things here that were really, I think, wisely established from the very beginning to get us where we are right now as far as diaconate. As a special, how can I put it, or specific norms that were necessary in order for this to work the way it was designed to work. And they were wise enough at that point in time to establish those norms and provide them for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand these out to you guys. I think there's what? What I want to do, just kind of cover a couple of points. Like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on it. You can just read it yourself. If you go to page 3 and look at item number 4, I'm just going to highlight a couple of these because these apply to you. And so what's going on right now is so applicable to your lives that it's just kind of uncanny in a way that it's held so firm. Item number 4 says, by the law of the church, confirmed by the Ecumenical Council itself, young men called to the diaconate are obliged to observe the laws of celibacy. I highlighted that just for grins. That's no longer a requirement, as you know. That likely ties in with why deacons are not allowed to remarry should their spouses explode in the driveway for whatever the reason. That's how Susan and I talk. That's what we call dying. You know, I said, well, Susan, if I was out in the driveway and I exploded. So she and I have talked about that for years, just for grins.
Why would you want to do that twice?
Yeah.
Makes a mess, that's what I told her, you know, said, if you are gonna go out there and explode in the driveway, you know, just let me know, I'll have the hose ready. Okay, item number 6, let young men to be trained for the diaconal office be received in a special institute where they will be put to the test and will be educated to live a truly evangelical life and prepared to fulfill usefully their own special function. That's a diaconate, that's part of what you're being called to do. Number 8, let only those young men be admitted to training who have shown a natural inclination of the spirit to service of the Christian community and who have acquired a sufficiently good store of knowledge in keeping the custom of their people and country. You're not going to be freelancing this job as a deacon. Number 9, specific training for the diaconate should be spread over a period of at least 3 years, now normally 4 years. You guys are in a truncated way. You get, what, 2.5 years, right? So with all your previous training, it's still going to fit in. I highlighted down towards the bottom, moreover, the whole plan of studies can be so arranged that in the last year, special training be given for various functions which deacons will usually carry out. And that's why you guys have spent those afternoons over and over and over going over some of those rites. You need to know those rites. I was not taught those rites when I became a deacon. I was lost. I didn't know what to do. I was of no use to the priest. So as mind-numbing as that is, you have to go through that. So I'm glad to see that you guys are being trained as well as you are. Number 11, older men with a single or married can be called to the diaconate. The latter, however, are not to be admitted unless there is a certainty not only about the wife's consent, but also about her blameless Christian life and those qualities which will neither impede nor bring dishonor on the husband's ministry. Your part is so huge. I talk to Susan about this quite often. I mean, her part is really huge. She is my counselor. She is, as Father Eliezer was saying, my director. I need to I'm tied in with her in the diaconate. It's just too bad that the women don't get some of that as well. That bugs me personally. Okay, number 12, the older age in this case is reached at the completion of the 35th year. That's why I understand it right now, it's 35 years. They'll accept you at 35. Prior to that, they may not, unless you're single and you're trying to get married or what have you. 15, let's see, 16. Once they will receive the order of deacon, even those who have been promoted at a more mature age cannot contract marriage by virtue of the traditional discipline of the church. I don't know about your class, but my class, when the women heard that, they all cheered. I thought it was kind of funny, you know? Like, I want to go back to the dating scene, you know? 17, let care be taken that the deacons do not exercise an art or a profession which in the judgment of the local ordinary is unfitting or impedes the fruitful exercise of these sacred offices. So you don't want to have a business in which you deal with drugs, or you're a hitman for the mob, or the White House press secretary for Trump. Or a male stripper.
Tom's out.
Finally, Tom, you dressed for that
You
job.
will notice though, I did read that number 4, celibacy is only for young men.
Oh, well, yeah.
Just reading the details.
But you dressed for that stripper thing. That is like knockout, dude.
I know.
How long do batteries last on just one side?
Double D will go by a week.
Yeesh, man.
Love you so much.
They really sell those, or did you make those?
I made them, okay? Fucking made.
They're not mine, they're
It has to be.
He's like, give him a hard time with his song. You're all getting a pair.
Yes, but you guys are kidding when you get ordained, right?
Yeah, warm up on the altar.
Somebody said.
I would never do that.
Especially if we lift up our alves.
Never do that. I had to repose the Eucharist last night, and I wore black socks.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Black socks.
Yeah. You probably want to.
No, I didn't have any shoes on, but I had black socks.
Yeah, people should concentrate on the blessed sacrament, not your
Yeah.
socks.
Yeah.
Good, Tom. You're moving it. You're there.
I'm in the right direction.
I think they have that same standard in the classroom.
The only one that can see these is Jeremy. They drive me
I can see
nuts.
it from here. I'm looking at him.
You're classic.
Well, that guy, I was sitting there.
They're classic. I just be thinking they were my blue shoes.
Tom takes so much crap from us. He wore blue shoes sometimes.
Oh, really?
That's right. Blue suede.
Yes.
Blue
Yeah,
suede.
blue suede.
You can do anything you want, but don't step on my blue suede.
Okay.
All right,
I change the batteries in my socks.
All right. So enough about the norms. Like I say, you can read all that stuff. It's interesting reading. It's a little dry, but I didn't want to get into it. But so I say it hadn't been part of my plan when I started these classes and putting all my notes together. I kind of got hit with this last minute, so there you go. So now what we're going to do is talk about what is this gift, the character of holy orders. Primarily, what I do want to do is, I could have given you a lot of dry information about permanent diaconate, but I want to talk from the heart about the diaconate because I think it's important for you to prepare that way. It's very, very important. We have to remember that God, really, He doesn't need us, but for some reason He calls us. I know I've never said this, but it's not about us. I can't remember where I saw this quote, but I ran into this quote. I had to put it in here. It says, to do anything less than the will of God for your life will bore you. Anybody get bored? Good question. I want to read a little quote to you that I ran into quite some time ago. It's very interesting. A famous man once said this, okay? He says, strange is our situation here on earth. Each of us comes here for a short visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to a divine purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing we do know. It is that we are here for the sake of others. Sounds good so far, doesn't it? The countless unknown souls with whose fate we are connected, we are here for the sake of others. Many times a day I realize how much my own outer and inner life is built upon the labors of people, both living and dead, and how earnestly I must exert myself in order to give in return as much as I have received. Anybody even venture to guess who might have said that? It was Albert Einstein. He has said some incredible things. He delved into science and math, but he had this really profound sense of his life, who he was here on this planet. So I mention that because speaking about the gifts, the character of the holy orders is not only the character that God or Christ confers on us, but it's the gifts that we will offer as well. God has selected you because of the gifts that He has given you. And by those gifts, He will confer that character of the Holy Spirit upon you as well. Now, insofar as it is a grade of holy orders, the diaconate does imprint that character, very sacramental grace upon each one of you. This diaconal character is it's this distinguishing, again, indelibly impressed sign that's on your soul, and it configures the one who is ordained to Christ, to our very Christ, who Himself came to serve. That's conferred upon us, the deacons, who wish to be the servants of Christ. And it brings with it, again, that sacramental grace. Now, with regard to deacons, you will be incredibly strengthened by this grace. I didn't know what was coming, but you'll find yourself incredibly graced by this strength, because you will find yourself dedicated to the people of God in the service, the diaconia of the liturgy, of the gospel, and certainly of charity. Three very important points there. And just as all the sacraments that imprint this character, grace is going to have this permanent essence upon each one of you. Now, the Church teaches us that by a special sacramental gift, holy orders, that holy orders confers on us, it is a particular consecration that's given to us because we're being consecrated to the will, the service of God. And if you think about that, that's huge. You know, we all have thought about the diaconate, what it means to us, why you want to be a deacon. But becoming alive in this idea of this character that's being conferred on you is quite huge. This character that you will receive at ordination has been likened to a wound. A wound. And why would that come up? That wound, by the way, is part of your ownership and what you're going to be as a deacon. I remember back then, he was still a Cardinal, Ratzinger made reference to the idea of a wound. He says it does call out to the owner. The owner happens to be you, but from now on, matter of fact, in Galatians, I found this, Galatians 6, chapter 1 through 7, it says, from now on, let no one make troubles for me, for I bear the marks of Jesus on my body. And there's that wound that we will carry. And I think that's really the sacramental character of what we'll carry as deacons. There's another scriptural understanding that I believe describes the character that's bestowed on us. And it's beautifully summed up in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. It says, yet I live, no longer I, but Christ lives in me. Those are important verses to remember, to live with in your life, to carry. It's a beautiful summation of what you're going to be as a deacon. That's who you're going to be in the diaconate. This is how Scripture underscores the interior self-surrender of yourselves, understanding that wound and that parallel, that strong parallel to Christ. And again, that's what you'll carry as a newly ordained deacon from that point on. You become the one. You will become the one who eagerly carries that mystery of Christ's public service and His charity as His own. But it will be Christ's own service and ministry as He lives His new life here on this earth through you. A person who's called to the diaconate makes themselves permanently available to Christ's sacrificial mystery. The sacrificial part is so dear, so important. And it is a mystery to us. You become the servant mystery of Christ Himself. It's indescribable as you delve into that, as you come to think about that over the years to come. It is indescribable what you're being called to be as a permanent deacon. And what makes this also special is this servant mystery of this sacrificial mystery coincides with the Eucharist, because it's Christ who offers His body and His blood in sacrifice, and also gives example of what communion with the sacrifice can do. that mass is one part that has become more and more and more pronounced to me, because I draw from the mass who I am and what I need to do. And this whole thing of sacrifice, Christ giving himself in sacrifice and utilizing us to offer that sacrifice is what's so important. It's not about our sacrifice, by the way. It's a sacrifice of Christ. You as a deacon, in a really beautiful sense, you disappear. You disappear into the action that you undertake, even at the Mass, when you think about it, and all the works that are being done for God. It goes very deeply. Your service is purely instrumental, more purely a serving more than anything else, and a self-effacing service as well. Your function as a deacon is to keep the active circle of charitable receiving and giving sacramentally within the church. That's your part. It's very important. To become permanently available to Christ is imparted upon you at ordination. It's such a huge, huge thing. And I wish I had realized that. I think, though, if I'd known that, I couldn't have made it through ordination. I'd just probably cried through the whole thing. Again, to be permanently available to Christ is imparted upon ordination, but it needs to be ever personally acted upon, so it's grace. Really, for all intents, flowers and flowers again, in the same measure by what it was received by you, and that's the measure of your faith. Further witness to the diaconal character, which I've talked about, is this paragraph, or rather this verse I found in Luke 22, verses 26 through 27. It says, "Let the greatest among you be as the youngest, and the leader as a servant. I am among you as the one who serves." It's that service part. Service doesn't just simply originate in your feelings of empathy towards others. Surprisingly, that's not where it originates. It has a much more dynamic source. Ordained service flows from your communion with Christ. That's huge. That's where that Mass is so important to me. When I look at what's going on, I know that I'm in communion with Christ right then and there. I'm not talking about Holy Communion, but communion with Christ. I understand who I am there, standing behind everything, saying, okay, I understand now far better what this diaconate is about. Now in Psalm 40 it notes, "Sacrifice and offering you do not want." Found that interesting. Sacrifice and offering you do not want, but ears open to obedience that you gave me. Psalm 40 verse 6. So the deacon, as we know, we're not being called to any kind of a priesthood, not to offer any sacrifice. If you thought that already, we're not there to offer any sacrifice, but service. It's always going to be that service, diaconia. And so we have to live and breathe that every day of our lives as deacons. To serve faithfully, a deacon needs to hear what it is that God desires. So again, it appears it's not about you, not at all. Listening to obedience is probably one of the more powerful elements of what you'll do as a deacon. I think it's one of the most powerful elements, learning to listen to God. So your prayer life changes because your prayer becomes more one of listening. I probably do far more listening now than I ever did. It's not just that one moment of the day, but during the course of the day. Those listening moments are going to be very, very important to all of you. In John chapter 5, verse 30, there's an interesting line. It says, "I cannot do anything on my own. I do not seek my own will, but the will of the one who sent me." Well, how are you going to hear that will? You have to listen. You have to be open to God's will. And when Christ inflicts this, let's call it this wound of diaconal ordination upon us, it's to make us vulnerable. To make us vulnerable to the mystery of being an obedient servant. It is, if you think about that wound, it's very sensitive. You have to become sensitive to what you're doing, who you are as that deacon. So I hope that you can embed that thought deeply into your souls, into your hearts, and feel its sharp points every single day. This desire to serve God's will really defines the heart of Christ and should as well define our hearts as well. This is Christ who served God first. When he came to this planet, he served God first. When he came to this planet, he loved God first. We're the lucky recipients of all that, but it was God first that he was serving. And we have to live by that same way. So we as deacons have to become become aware that Christ is now speaking to God about his desire to utilize us. He wishes us to be the ones who carry on in his church. I still think about when Jesus, just before he ascended into heaven, sending the Holy Spirit down, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he doesn't have that many men and women here. How's he going to do it? Look what he's done. So, you know, we can't question what we're being asked to do. Ours is just to say, okay, I will do that. But there's so few virtues rather that are necessary to a deacon in the capacity to listen, begin to listen to God, listen to Christ in prayer. Found this line, he says, listening for the needs of the people and then discerning with God what needs can be served by his ministry is a prayer emblematic of the deacon. I thought I had a pretty decent prayer life when I started. But the diaconate, because your formation continues on and on, changes you. It truly does change you. Now I'm kind of jaded. I think I know who I am. How can I change? But it starts with the relationship, with God. Receiving this gift of holy orders establishes your connection to God far more deeply than you realize. Now, you'll find this kind of interesting, but in all that you do, it's not your job as a deacon to do a lot of work. I know that sounds kind of interesting. It's the deacon's call to stay in the proper of being receptive to God, to the gifts that Christ gives and wishes to give to others. It's not us, I want to do this, I got to do this, I got to do that. It's the idea of remaining as receptive to Christ along the way. That's what's going to change in you, how you go about doing the work that you do. Specifically, Christ is inviting a deacon to be available to him, to the needs, of the diocese, and to incarnate this eternal availability of Christ to the poor, to those in need, to those who are not getting their food, the poor widows, all the others. So you see, what we're doing now as a deacon is the same thing as to why the diaconate started. We're the ones that are being called to respond to the needs of the church, all those who need the help within the church. You know, what Christ is asking of a deacon, I think is really quite clear when it boils down to it. He's asking us, will you say yes? Will you say yes to my sharing? Will you do that? Will you say yes to my availability in you until you die? So it's far-reaching. And Luke 14, verses 15 through 24, says here, will you let me act in you, through you, so that I might call many to the banquet? It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's so applicable to what you're wishing to do. So a deacon's call, again, is to be this faithful person to the character that's received by you in your ordination, so that people that you serve can do something that's really quite special. They can come to recognize and come to know that Christ himself is in you. You know, I don't know how I can say that Christ is in me, but I have to have that faith that he is in me somehow, that people are seeing him through me. I wouldn't know how. It's like in a homily, when I write a homily, people talk to me about what they heard. I'm thinking, that's interesting. You heard it differently than what I wrote it. I love that, because it wasn't me.
What was that verse, Sunday, Luke what?
Luke 14, verses 15 through 24. I'm giving you these because these it's kind of hard to come by. You know, you go through the Bible and you can't remember all these verses, but as I run into them, I think, that's a keeper right there. I've got to hold on to this one. And so this is tremendous fidelity that you will grow as you become a deacon, and it should grow now before you become a deacon. That's expressed in this unceasing prayer to Christ. It's so very important to you. You know, prayer is this conversation that should continually place you in a posture of surrender to God. It's very, very important. You know, Christ is this love, this beautiful love that bears everything. The deacon is the one who has to be there, available to him, to let him do that. The diaconal ministry involves activity, true, but the key to living in holy orders is to do something that's kind of interesting, to let that holy piece order you around. I know it's kind of interesting to say that, or kind of odd, but in so being ordered, you as a deacon are letting Christ use you, your natural and acquired gifts, as doorways of grace to enter and increase the spiritual, I don't know what's a good word, spiritual potency of His presence to those that you were serving. You know, when a deacon allows the holy to kind of, in a sense, order you around, you're allowing for an effective ministry, but not one that depends on your bag of tricks that you've acquired, or all these trick ponies that you use at work or around people, around neighbors. I think sometimes we as deacons run afoul of and probably emotionally exhausted by some of the things that we try to do, because we ask ourselves, well, why are these things that I've tried at work and around all these other people, why are these things not working anymore for me? What is it that's wrong? What's changed here that this stuff is no longer effective in my life? As an example, you know, when I first started, you know, I was in IT for a long time, and I did a lot of teaching in IT stuff, and we went through all kinds of stuff. You should have seen the boards we used. So I was very oriented to that, and the programming and all this. I mean, it was all in my head. This is what you do, this is what you do, this is why you do if and loops and all this other stuff. It was very cut and dry. I could teach that stuff really well. And Susan told me one day, as I started writing my homilies, she says, no, you're an IT guy. You're telling them what to do. You got it all fixed right away. She says, that's not your job. You can't do that. I said, why not? It makes sense to me. She says, yeah, it does make sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to me or anyone else. So what I finally learned is that I'm effective at my job, but perhaps not in my ministry if I try to apply the same things. There's a transition that you need to make, and it's a transition that I had to learn to make. It's the one that took me from being who I am and relying on my natural pool of talents and yours of professional experience, to becoming a person who relies on the depth of my communion with Christ. I had to find a way to translate all that I am, all that I have. How am I going to apply it now to Christ, my communion with Christ, who relies, who's going to rely on me forever. I have to find a way, so I can't be who I am anymore. I need to be who I am, but how I am is what needs to change. So how do you come to rely on this depth of communion with Christ? What kinds of things do you think you would have to do? Well, you know, the thing that to me, it just speaks to me really loudly is one of the things that's very important to me is the fact that I had been given the privilege and the right to proclaim the gospel. For me, that was the very beginning of understanding what I was going to be doing, because I realized that I'd barely begun to experience how powerful and how beautiful Christ is in me and how joyful that is. I had to learn to look at the scriptures far more differently than I could. By virtue of your ordination, you and the priest can utter the very words of Christ in the liturgy. Think about how beautiful and powerful that is. You have to be in communion with Christ in order to be able to do that. You have to know it. You have to believe what you see and what you're reading or saying or writing. And you have to trust it. You have to feel it. I've told Jeremy and others that when you write a homily, the best homilies are the ones that you feel it. You truly feel it. you understand it's true, and you just busted to get it out because it's so beautiful, it's so important. It's Christ in you, trying to come out of you. You're the messenger. You're the one who's sending the message of love and heart and purpose, but you've got to feel it in your heart. It's very important. You have to be immersed. Within this communion of Christ, you have to be immersed in the intimacy of being with Christ. As a deacon meditates upon the Gospels, it's Christ who's drawing your heart out. It's really quite important. There in the heart is where Christ is going to speak to you as a deacon about sharing his own servant heart, Christ's own servant heart, sharing with the deacon Jesus' own will for himself regarding mystery and regarding service. And he's doing this for you. He's wanting you, all people, to step up and do all this for him. So the gospel becomes this point of securing communion with Christ. It's really quite important. Everything you do in ministry begins and ends with Christ. The Mass is really a very important part. I want to talk about that because, when you think about it, the simple things that you're doing during the course of the Mass, you're thinking, well, I need to do this, I know I need to do this, I need to do this other thing. You're there to assist the priest and keep the movements of the liturgical prayer really basically flowing, and that's very important for you to do. Jeremy and I have talked about that, even without servers there, you have to keep things flowing without anybody really noticing. That's really very important. But in doing that, you become this point of secure communion with Christ during the course of the Mass. It's very important for you to do that. These movements emanate from your love for Christ. You're there to serve. That's where you're really quite visible in what you do as a deacon. But to me, it was far more, I don't know if it's far more important, just as important as what I do outside of the Mass. That love that you have for the Mass is quite alive at that moment. I think what the Mass does for me, it reinvigorates me, it refuels me for all the days after that until I come to the next Mass. Here we are in the Mass, we're in the middle of this beautiful, beautiful sacrifice that's alive. It's all around us. These movements can seem really modest as far as what you're doing, and hopefully they become really effortless over time as well. But what's important for that, when you're doing the Mass like that, is that now you have time for Christ during the Mass. All those parts, you're seamlessly working through all of that. Now you have time for Christ. That's when the Mass really comes alive for you. You're that schlep in the back behind the priest who doesn't count. But such beautiful communion with Christ, man, that Mass is extraordinarily powerful. I find those Masses sometimes very, very draining emotionally and spiritually because of what's going on. They really, really, truly feed me because Christ is calling out to you as a deacon from within the sacrament, this beautiful sacrament of holy orders, through his divine love. It's very important that he's calling out to you. And he's imparting.
Schlep?
Schlep?
How do you spell that?
S-H-L-E-P-P. That's my title.
We should not get those name tags.
Yeah, really. Yeah, that's one of my favorite words. I use that to describe you as a deacon, I truly do. Susan kind of gets mad at me. She says, "Nah, don't call yourself that." I said, no, really, I need to know who I am. But really, your service is going to flow through this beautiful intimacy as a servant of God. That's what's going to feed you. And be aware of that. Be prepared for that. Matter of fact, be prepared for that well before you get to your ordination. I want you to be up there just about ready to just bawl your eyes out because it's incredible. It's just beyond anything that I would have expected. I'll tell you what I did in a little bit. Matter of fact, I'll tell you now. Down the road, you guys are going to prepare for ordination. They're going to schlep you across the street. And you're going to find out where you're going to stand. In front of those white steps. And what's going to happen is that I want you, once you find out where you're going to stand, whenever you have a chance, come to the cathedral and stand there. And stand there, and stand there. Think about what's going to happen to you. And know that that's your final rest, that's your final stop before Christ calls you up to that altar. He truly calls you up and you're ordained that deacon, know where you're gonna stand, be ready for it. Know that Christ is gonna call you that final time, and you're gonna get up there. And hope to heck that you can collect yourself so that, so you don't fall apart. It's extraordinarily beautiful. For me, the best part, it gave me a chance to finally truly prepare myself, was when we lay prostrate on that cold marble. One, the marble was cool, that was a blessing. But two, they're intoning all the saints, and there you lay, and your mind is going faster than you've ever felt it go. And then you stand up, and then you're almost ready. Wait for that last call. You're going to be called. It's just incredible. I had to do it many, many times, and luckily I only worked about 2.5 blocks from here. I would come here at lunch hour to prepare myself because I had to toughen myself. I knew it was going to be tough, so I did it. It's that intimacy that you have with Christ, that intimacy that you have with His holy orders of the permanent diaconate. It's that fidelity that you're developing with Christ is going to be so, so very important. You're going to receive this gift, this wound upon your heart from Christ, this brand mark of love that's so extraordinary that you don't even know what to do with it, but you'll find out, because Christ is not going to let you go after that. He's got a lot of work to do, and you're going to be a part of that. But be always there. Be always aware of that intimacy that you now have with Christ. It's between you and Jesus one-on-one personally. It's really quite beautiful. And once ordained to the diaconate, it's interesting what you'll be called to do. In a sense, you're overseeing the work of the church because you're going to be a big part of that. Again, we as deacons do not preside at the Eucharistic liturgy. We don't. The priest does all of that. But rather, we do some really extraordinarily powerful things. One of the things that means a lot to me is that we as deacons intone the dismissal rite. The initiation, when we send out the liturgy out with the people who were there, when we say, go in peace. Go in peace of Christ to love and serve the Lord. Can you imagine what you're doing there? That's amazing. That's extraordinary. You're being called to do that. You know, unlike the priest, our words do not, they don't bring about the real presence of Christ. We're the ones that send you out with Christ. There's such a beauty to that. And those are the things, you know, you want to bask in and appreciate, but you just understand, well, that's just my part. So you just do it and go on to whatever's next. Again, simply, we do not share it all in the priesthood. But since we share in holy orders, we receive this portion of Christ's own actions. This is Christ who you're mimicking. That's powerful. Again, the priest shares in this sacrificial self-giving and what's called the thanksgiving as the head. But you receive that portion that is the part of doing Christ's actions. There's that part about being servant again. It's really quite beautiful, quite lovely. All right, now I wanted to get into this piece, and this is when I was first thinking about this class, Theology of Holy Orders, the Permanent Diaconate. I was messing around. I was trying to think of some other fun little titles that I was going to put on the board. My first one was the Theology of the Mystery of Vocation. Or I went with a lifelong commitment from an evolutionary and relational perspective. I was going to do that just to clown a few guys, and they're going to think, what is that? What's he talking about? Oh my gosh, I just had lunch, I'm going to fall asleep, you know. Then I kind of looked a little bit more deeply, and I thought, knowing God's will as it bears on vocational discernment. I really felt there was something very important there, but then I finally really simplified it. If I would have typed it up here, or written it up here, the title of this part would have been, Be Who You Are, Being as God Calls You. Because it really does truly speak to the diaconate. It's very, very important. You know, obviously you are here because you have considered, or you're still considering, technically, you're still discerning a diaconate vocation. I hope you're still discerning. You hear information, and having been there myself, I think Drew said it's 10 years ago, it was like 8.5 years ago. I know it to be a very